Okay, in this section, this is 4.6b, and we're going to look at another way of solving equations that have exponents 2 or more, and this is called completing the square. So let's first just start off with some basics of completing the square. Number 1, it says to find the term that completes the square. So we're looking for this part right here, for the third part of the trinomial. So this is what we call b over 2 squared. B is actually talking about the middle term because a quadratic equation is in the generic form ax squared plus bx plus c. So b is the middle term. So in this particular problem, b is -6. So we're going to take -6, divide by 2, and then square. So -6 divided by 2 is -3. When we square, notice it's in parentheses, so it will be positive. So this answer right here will be positive 9. Okay, so do the same thing with number 2. We're looking for C. So we're going to do b over 2 squared. So this one, b is -18, divide by 2, and then square. So -18 divided by 2 is -9. Again, remember when you square it, you will get a positive. So 81 goes right there. Okay, so another one, m squared minus 8m plus blank. We're going to do b over 2 squared. And so that's -8 over 2 squared, which is -4 squared. Remember, it's going to be a positive answer, so it's positive 16. Oops. Okay, so that's just the basics of using, let's do one more. Doing b over 2 squared. Let's do one more since we have one more example. So we're going to take 26 divided by 2 and then squared. So 13 squared is 169. Okay, so just remember b over 2 squared. That's going to help us find that C. All right, so on this one, we're going to solve by completing the square. So what we do to solve by completing the square is after the minus 4x, we're going to write plus blank equals 1, and we're going to put a plus blank. So if we do plus blank on one side of the equation, we have to do plus blank on the other side. So we're going to do b over 2 squared. So in this problem, b is -4. Divide by 2, and we get -2 squared, and we get positive 4. Okay, so that's 1 plus 4. I'm going to erase that here. So that was -2 squared, which was 4. Okay, so over here, this right here is a perfect square trinomial. And what we're going to do is we're going to factor that. So that factors into x minus 2 squared. This 2 right here, or this -2 right here, that is actually, that is actually the b over 2 part. Okay, so you can use b over 2 to find that part for your factors. All right. And then over here, we have 1 plus 4, which is 5. So now we're going to use the solving by taking the square root of both sides. So we're going to square root. And remember, this square root and this square cancel out. So I have x minus 2 equals, remember this is plus or minus the square root of 5. And then we're going to add 2. Now when we add 2 to a plus or minus, what we're going to do is put that 2 in front of the plus or minus. Now, this is the answer. We don't want to put any decimals in there. We're just going to write it just like that. So 2, come down here and type plus or minus, type square root, and then your 5. And that is how we solve with completing the square. Now, completing the square is usually used when we can't factor cleanly. So that's why we have this method. All right, on this problem, first of all, I need to get my 12x. So that's on the same side as my x term. Then, in order to complete the square, this is the only one where we don't want to equal to 0. So we want the x terms to be on one side, plus blank, and the constant term to be on the other side. Okay, so this is getting it to be, getting ready to be completing the square. All right, so we're going to do b over 2 squared. So that's negative 12 over 2 squared. Negative 6 over 2 squared is 36. So remember, we do plus blank on the left side. We have to do plus blank on the right side. So when we factor this, this is x minus b over 2, which was 6. And then negative 17 plus 36 is 19. And then we do the square root of both sides. And remember, this square and the square root cancel out. So I have x minus 6 equals, remember when we do the square root of an equation, it's going to be plus or minus the square root of 19. Add 6. And then remember, we're going to put that 6 in front, write it first, then the plus or minus, and then the square root of 19. So we come down here and type the plus or minus, type the square root, and then 19. All right, now in this problem, we have 3x squared minus 18x plus 24 equals 0. So first, we're going to subtract 24. So we're going to get myself some more room here, 3x squared minus 18x equals negative 24. Now, the thing is, you can't do completing the square until this little number right here in front of the x squared has to be a 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide each term by that 3. So divide by 3, divide by 3, divide by 3. So now I have x squared minus 18 minus 6x equals negative 8. Now I can do the plus blank. All right, so negative 6 over 2 squared is going to be negative 3 squared, which is 9. So I'm going to put a 9 here and a 9 here. So this is x squared, I had that right the first time, minus 6x plus 9 equals 1. Now, factor, so it's x minus 3 squared equals 1. Take the square root of both sides. So I get x minus 3 equals plus or minus 1. Now, this is not going to be a radical answer. So we're actually going to have two answers here. We have plus or minus 1, which is actually positive 1 plus 3, and negative 1 plus 3. So positive 1 plus 3 is 4. Negative 1 plus 3 is 2. So we actually have two answers here that neither one of them are radicals. All right, now this one's called vertex form. So this one's a little different than what we've been doing. On this one, I'm going to write x squared plus 8x plus blank. Then I'm going to put the plus 7, and I'm going to do minus blank. Now, I'm not on the same side of the equation, so my two blanks are going to have two different signs. Right after the x term, the one that's got b with it, the 8, then we're going to write plus blank, and after the constant term, we're going to write minus blank. So we're going to do 8 divided by 2. We're going to do the b divided by 2 squared. So 4 squared is 16. So I'm going to put 16 here. That's plus 16. And over here, I'm going to put minus 16. So this is actually vertex form for a parabola. We're going to take these first three parts right here, first three terms, and we're going to factor. So remember, this is b over 2 for right after this part. So b divided by 2 That will be 4 squared. And then this part we're just going to simplify. So that's minus 9. So that is how we do vertex form. It's not that hard. It's just a little different because you have to remember to do minus blank instead of plus blank on both sides. Okay. All right, number 9, we're looking for b, or k in this instance. So we're going to go backwards. So normally we would do b over 2 squared. And so this time we know what b over 2 squared is. It's 144. So first we're going to do the square root. And so the square root of 144 is plus or minus 12. And then I'm going to multiply by 2. So multiplying by 2, and I get plus or minus 24. So k already has that minus sign, so I don't need to type the minus sign, so I'm just going to type 24. You don't need the plus or minus for the answer on this one. Okay, so on this one, we're going to complete the square. So x squared plus 7x. Then we're going to add 1. So I have x squared plus 7x, remember to write plus blank, equals 1 plus blank. So since we're dealing with both sides of the equation, we have plus blank. Only when we're dealing with one side of the equation do we do plus blank and then minus blank. So in this one, when I do b over 2, 7 over 2 squared, that is 49 over 4. Now do not make that into a decimal. Just leave it 49 over 4. Okay, so I'm going to have x squared plus 7x plus 49 over 4 equals. Now, when you do this side, if you do this in your calculator, make sure you do second ABC so that you get an improper fraction. We don't want a mixed number. So this will be 53 over 4. All right, so when we factor, remember this second term right here, right after the x plus, is the b over 2. It's this part right here. All right, now we're going to do the square root of both sides. And we get x plus 7 over 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 53 over the square root of 4. Now remember, we can take the square root of 4. So we're going to leave the square root of 53 over 2. All right, so now we're going to subtract 7 halves. So we're going to have negative 7 halves plus or minus the square root of 53 over 2. Now, since they're both over 2, we're just going to write it as negative 7 plus or minus the square root of 53 all over the same denominator, so all over 1. So when you come over here and you enter your fraction button first and type the top part. So negative 7 plus or minus square root of 53, and then tab down to the bottom for your 2. Okay, all right, last one is x squared minus x. I'm going to go ahead and write plus blank because they already have that 1 over there on the right side of the equal sign, plus blank. All right, so we're going to take take b. b is actually 1. So negative 1 over 2 squared is positive 1 over 4. So positive 1 over 4 goes in the blank. So this is x squared minus x plus 1/4 equals 5/4. And again, you can put that in your calculator. Just make sure you do second ABC in order to make it improper. All right, so factoring this side, it's x minus the b over 2. Okay, and then we're going to take the square root of both sides. And so we get x minus 1/2 equals plus or minus the square root of 5 over the square root of 4, which is 2. So add 1/2 to both sides. And we're going to write it as 1/2, it's positive, plus or minus the square root of 5 over 2. They're both over the same denominator. So I'm just going to write the numerators, 1 plus the square root of 5, all together, and then over one denominator, 2. So again, you're going to enter your fraction button first, 1 plus or minus square root of 5, tab down for your denominator. Okay, and that is how you work completing the square type problems.